get us started. Welcome everybody. We may still have a few people join us as the morning goes on here. And I want to introduce Patty Stewart. So everybody's screen puts people in different places. She's at the top right corner of my screen, which Patty's waving. If you haven't yet met Patty, she's actually a member of Westminster, but she is also our seminary intern this year. She's in her middle year at Princeton Seminary, and she's doing her internship with us this year at Westminster. So we're thrilled to have her. And you might have seen her. She's been helping and leading some of our worship services. She is going to be the teacher for this class for the next 2 weeks, and probably some weeks after that too. But we're thrilled that she's with us, and I'm
happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm going to just encourage you along the way. We're going to watch the DVD a little bit, like partway into the class this morning of Amy Jill Levine, and she goes by AJ, so I'm going to say AJ. And so we're going to watch her do a little bit of her teaching on this week's lesson later on. But until we get there, I just thought you might have a little piece of paper to take notes when she's teaching, because she just is, like I said, just like her book, she's got so much packed in there that you might, just want to jot a note, something that when we're finished that you might want to talk about that I might not be lifting up that caught you. So just, that's an FYI. And also, if you have not purchased the book but are interested, you can order them online, but this is the book, The Sermon on the Mount, A Beginner's Guide to the Kingdom of Heaven, by Amy Jill Levine. And I encourage you, you don't have to have a copy to do the class, but she's got so much good stuff in here that it'll be richer for you if you have the book. But as I said, if you don't have the book, it's okay too, because I'm going to quote some of the things she said in the chapters to pull from. So it's not a necessity, but it would certainly, I think, enhance it for you if you get yourself a copy. So I'm going to open us with prayer. So if you join your hearts with me for prayer. Oh God, most holy, we praise you as your Son gathered disciples to himself to teach them your ways. So your Spirit has gathered us in this time, in this place, on Zoom. Make us alert and attentive as we read and reflect on Jesus' words. Help us to take them to heart and live into them so that your will is truly done on earth as in heaven. We pray this in the name of our true teacher, Jesus Christ. Amen. So we're going to do a little poll right at the beginning. So I'm going to put the poll up, and you can click on whatever is the appropriate answer for you. Okay, so I'm going to okay, it looks like a fair amount of people plan to get the book or have a copy of the book. So that just, I think, helps those of us that are going to be leading the class to understand a little bit, where people are coming from. So thank you. Hi, Meg. I see Meg joined us. Nice to have you with us. So how many of you are familiar with Amy Jill Levine's teaching, or have read, or, okay. So looks like Kathy and Bob and Jean Bell. So I'm going to invite those who've been exposed to her. If you want to just share a little bit of what you know about her, what your impressions of her as a teacher are with the class. And you have to unmute yourselves.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
I have been with her, Amy, Jill, on several occasions. And the thing that always struck me, she is Jewish, has a great sense of humor. Once you hear her get started, you think that she was wholly committed to, well, she's wholly committed to Jesus, but almost to Jesus as Christ. Fascinating, and she, to me, makes the Christian scriptures come alive out of the Jewish tradition, and it just puts a whole new light on how it was heard by those who first heard it. I love her. I love hearing her.
Yeah. Yeah. I've read her things. I've never heard her in person until the DVD. So I think she has a great presence, teaching style. She's a professor of New Testament and Jewish studies at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And as Bob shared, she invites us to hear Jesus' words in his Jewishness, in the way that the people who he was a Jew and he was speaking to Jews would have heard what he had to say. Their scriptures are what we call our Old Testament, but that is the scriptures. There was no New Testament. So when they talk about the scriptures, that's the scriptures that we also share in our faith. So in her book, she describes, she says she reads Jesus' Sermon on the Mount as a beginner's guide to the kingdom of heaven. And in it, she talks about when she was 13, how she went to Roman Catholic Church with her friends, and she read the Gospel of Matthew at that time, but she really liked reading the stories. But when she got to the Sermon on the Mount, like that, she just kind of skipped over that because it's like, sermon, that sounds boring, so she wasn't interested in reading a sermon. And then she said, it wasn't until later in her life in college, where she was interested in studying New Testament, that she again wanted to read or she kind of hesitated about reading it. And then she said that her Christian friends were telling her, oh yeah, when she started to read it, then they're like, oh yeah, that's really good because Jesus kind of corrects and fixes what Judaism gets wrong, and so she said that made her really want to read it. What are they talking about? And she says rather what she saw is she learned that Jesus isn't a Christian talking to Jews or to other Christians, but he is a Jew talking to Jews, and rather than telling his fellow Jews, to do away with the Torah, he's telling them he has insight into the heart of the Torah and that they would do well to listen to him. So I just thought that was an interesting insight. I grew up in Broomall, and we had a lot of Jewish kids in our school, a lot of friends of mine that were Jewish. I was invited to their bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs, and we would get the Jewish holidays off from school as well as the Christian holidays. And I have to say, as a Christian, I think I got influenced a little bit by that. Like, Jesus kind of fixed, was telling them the fix of Judaism, and I'm curious if any of you ever had that experience of encountering that idea that the Sermon on the Mount or Jesus corrects or contradicts Jewish observance of Torah. Have some of you had similar? You have to unmute yourselves if you're going to speak, because I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think I did. Up until I started, like 3 or 4 years ago, I started really digging into actually Amy Jill, and I I love what she said, that he has insight into the Torah. He's not fixing it.
Right.
He's expanding it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You'll hear some of that next week. It talks about the extensions.
And I know that other classes I've been in, we talk about this, that Jesus, did think that didn't understand the spirit of the law, and they were taking it too literally in some cases. And when he's challenged about it, he also makes that comment that he didn't come here to replace the law, but to fulfill the law.
Right.
So he really is expanding on it, or trying to get them to have a different understanding than they did at that time as to what was really being said in the literature of the Torah.
So we're going to pay really close attention to Jesus' words in the study, with our hope that we'll hear them through his Jewishness, and that those words might shape or even shake up our understanding of what the kingdom of heaven is. I'm going to share my screen. See if I can do this without messing up too badly. Okay. So this photo in the picture here is a photo of the Mount of the Beatitudes in the Galilee region of Israel. This is the traditional site that they say that Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. When back in 1997, I think I got to be there, and it is pretty awesome to think, Jesus sitting here or standing and talking to disciples, talking to crowds of people who gather around. But Amy Jill, points out in her book that the Sermon on the Mount isn't really a sermon. It's a series of discrete teachings. And if Jesus had said everything that we call the Sermon on the Mount, which is basically Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7, if he said that all in one sitting, one sermon, quote, he said your head would have exploded. It's just too much there for one time. So she's saying, and I think a lot of scholars would agree with her, that what we call the Sermon on the Mount didn't all come out of his mouth in one sitting, to a crowd in one sitting. But Matthew, as the editor, took these teachings and put them together, which isn't to say that he didn't teach from this area or this hill or this mountain, whether all of it was here, but I just thought that would be helpful for us to know as we go into this. So leading up to Matthew 5, I think, she says it's helpful to read the beginning of Matthew, the first 4 chapters, to get up to here, because she feels like everything in those first 4 chapters prepares us for this sermon, that everything that comes after these chapter 5 through 7 is kind of enacting what he's teaching in the sermon in the rest of the gospel. So is there a volunteer, if somebody would be willing to read this Matthew 4, verse 23 through 5:2, which kind of leads us up to the Sermon on the Mount as we're going to read.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Nick.
Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and cursing every disease and every sickness among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and plans, demonics, epileptics, and paralytics, and he cured them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying,
Okay. So this is early in Jesus' ministry. There's these large crowds that have been following him. What do you make of that? Why do you think he's attracting these large crowds?
well, I would assume that he's been performing miracles like curing people too. And so his fame is spread that he's this miracle worker who's getting the dead to rise and people who've been paralyzed to walk. And so he's, I guess, really got a following of people who follow him from town to town, seeing what he says and what miracles he performs.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, it's Sue Kelly. I'm thinking that, Jesus was humble and helped the poor and the people. He was not part of the organized religion, and he was speaking in a different way. So he was pretty much a really out of the box sort of presence. And that may have been quite a curiosity. And then watching the good works, I'm thinking that would have kind of held his audience to search for more.
I would think that he also, because he was teaching in synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, that he was also giving them hope.
Yes. Bob.
Elsewhere, it says that Jesus spoke with authority. And I think we all like when somebody speaks or preaches or teaches with a sense of authority. And the word gets around, hey, this man really speaks with authority. And there's a little phrase there in verse 5:1 that could just slip by us. It's elsewhere in the New Testament. He went up the mountain and he sat down. Whenever a rabbi sat down, that meant they had something really, really important to say. Now, I don't know what that says about we who are preachers who stand up to preach. Maybe, Jenny, you and your team, next time you preach, sit down like Jesus did,
Well,
if you really have something important to say. But that phrase can just slip by us. Oh, he just sat down. That meant I've got something important to say. So that if somebody sat down, they would really start to listen.
When isn't that the whole thing? When E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen, or something like that. There was an old,
Yeah.
yeah.
And wouldn't it also apply, Bob, that it was going to take a while, that whatever he was going to say was going to be for a while, and it's better to sit than be standing all the time?
I don't know what the crowds do. I assume they were sitting too, but
Yeah, I would think.
if he was taking a while, sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you climbed up a mountain, you probably want to sit down. Yeah.
Hi, Joni.
Yeah.
I was wondering what in the phrase proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, if what he was proclaiming to them was different than what's proclaimed to us today. I mean, we look at the proclamation of the gospel in a certain way because we're Christians, but he hadn't declared, I shouldn't say that definitively, I don't think that he had declared that he was the Messiah yet. So what do we think that he was proclaiming?
Well, I think he's proclaiming a new thing that God is doing, and that the kingdom of heaven is the way God intends for the world, for people to live and be, different than the way we've kind of made it. That he's got different intentions, for us, and that God's kingdom is come among us.
So, but he was proclaiming to the Jews. What specifically was he proclaiming to his people? If the proclamation would be, I am the Messiah.
No, his proclamation is the good news that God is doing this new thing. And so, he's a Jew preaching to Jews, using the Jewish scriptures. So, pulling from those scriptures that talked about the hope, and so he's saying this is what's the good news. The poor, or the lame shall walk, the blind shall see. This is the kingdom of heaven, is coming among us. So
Yeah, maybe he was proclaiming a continuation of John the Baptist's message to repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand.
mhm.
That's sort of, it woke them all up.
Yeah. Something's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what the kingdom looks like.
Yeah.
Healing the
Listen,
sick
look,
and
pay attention.
raising the dead. Mhm.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next.
I'm not questioning it. I'm just trying to understand what we think the actual proclamation was.
Yeah. So let me move on. So in Matthew's gospel, Amy Jill says it's no accident that the Sermon on the Mount is on a mountain. So Matthew's gospel, he makes allusions to Jesus going up mountains. All these, I put it on the screen. On that handout too, if you print it out, there's a handout available to you, through a link that Lynn would have put up today on the email that went out, that you can also print. But I've got those scriptures on there as well. But these are just some examples of other places in Matthew's gospel where there's reference to Jesus going up the mountain. So in 4:8:10, the day, that's when Jesus is tempted, goes into the wilderness, and then the devil takes him up to a high mountain and says, all these kingdoms could be yours. Matthew 14:22-23, Jesus goes up a mountain to pray after the feeding of the 5,000. Matthew 15:29-31, Jesus goes up a mountain and the crowds follow him for healing. 17:1-6 is the transfiguration that takes place on the mountain. 24:3, sitting on the Mount of Olives, Jesus speaks to his disciples about the signs of the end of the age. They ask him about that. And then 28:16-20, this is a post-resurrection account that Jesus commissions his disciples on a mountain in Galilee. So this is all, Matthew really does a lot of lifting up, in different ways that Jesus goes to mountains for these different things that are there.
But also, I mean, that's in the Jewish tradition. Moses goes up to the mountaintop to get the 10 Commandments.
Yes, and we're going to get to that next. Hold on to that thought. So yeah, kind of going along those lines, what conclusions could you draw about what it means for Matthew, for Jesus to be on a mountain?
I guess I've always thought about it in such a simple way that being up on the mountain, your voice travels and you can spread what you're hearing to more people because they can hear you when you're talking.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
didn't the ancient people in general sort of see the mountain as a place where gods were? Not just Jews, but but like Greeks and everybody else, and it just kind of represented a
I
certain
think,
divineness maybe to it.
yeah, I think there is something to that. Well, we'll move on because I think the next slide, it hits on what Nick was referring to. So in the Sermon on the Mount, that mountain also would, for the Jewish people, bring back that memory of Moses on Mount Sinai and bringing the Torah to the people from Mount Sinai, which was huge. Here they are, they've been released from their bondage in Egypt. They're out in the wilderness, and then Moses comes with this Torah, this teaching of how they are to live. This is kind of this for this new community. This is the way God has asked them to live and to be, and give some guidelines or some laws and some ethic for how to be this new community. And now they've got Jesus on this mountain giving this new community, that's being formed for the kingdom of heaven, the beginner's guide to the kingdom of heaven, as Amy Jill Levine says. This new community being formed, and it gives another sense of that Mount Sinai moment, for people, that I could see Matthew might want to be lifting that idea up when he talks about this. So for Jews who are hearing, who are his audience, I'm sure that they would have mentally had some connection, like, oh, this is like Moses, giving us this teaching. So it evokes that Jewish tradition of that new creation, and that we're being freed from bondage from the old to something new that God's doing. You think of all the people being healed. I mean, if you've been in bondage to your affliction and you're being healed, that's huge. So how might remembering God's gift of the Torah shape these listeners' expectations for Jesus' Sermon on the Mount?
Well, I guess you might think that Jesus was going to reaffirm, the 10 Commandments that Moses received, and he was going to be more in alignment with traditional Jewish teaching. I mean, I think that might have been their expectation, but they probably have learned by now also that he says things and looks at things differently than the law has traditionally taught in the Torah too. So I don't think they probably saw him as radical as we do now, but he was different than certainly their traditional teaching.
Any other thoughts?
I had an idea here, that Jesus has been with the crowds in numerous places, telling them all kinds of things. I think that this is having it up on a mountain establishes that this is of supreme importance. Not that the others weren't, other things he spoke to them and taught them were not important, but this one had extra, he wanted to emphasize it. And maybe because, it was such a huge crowd too.
I was thinking that piece, that following up on what Tom said, that piece of the fact that Jesus has been with the crowds, healing. In addition to the speaking that he's doing to them now, there was time with them listening, hearing about their fears, their illnesses, their diseases. I see that interaction happening, which would have been Moses also. Moses was with those people, leading them out of Egypt, wandering through the wilderness, knew those people, they knew him. And then he goes up to the mountain to speak with God, to receive the 10 commandments. And to me, that's a piece of what builds the authority. The fact that Jesus isn't just somebody who's standing up there saying, let me tell you the way it is. They already know this person and know how this person has interacted with them. And that then speaks with authority there's to me, a stronger sense of this authority comes from God.
Thank you. Go ahead. This will be the last comment. Go ahead. And then I'm gonna move us on. I just realized how late it's getting.
I just feel that when Nick, I think it was talked about the first being the commandments that were coming down on the mountain. I feel like Jesus' choice of the mountain, he was going to continue the commandments. He was going to continue to give the guidance of how God wants us to live and what would be some of the rules that would make the best possible holy life for someone. So I think from Jesus's standpoint, he must have been very aware that this was a continuing of that tradition, that event.
Yes, he's got some insights. All right, I'm going to move us to the Beatitudes, which is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And the Beatitudes are 9 proverb-like proclamations of blessing that Jesus announces at the very beginning of this Sermon on the Mount, which again, thinking of Matthew's gospel, Matthew places the Sermon on the Mount really at the very beginning of his gospel. So this is kind of then the teaching that will then be fleshed out in the rest of the gospel. So each beatitude consists of 2 phrases, the condition, blessed are the, and then the result, for they shall. So in most of these phrases, these would have been familiar from the Old Testament scriptures that the Jews that are listening are familiar with. So Jesus, though, is then elevating familiar blessings that they would know from those scriptures and elevating them to new levels and teachings. And they present a new set of ideals that focus on love and humility rather than force and exaction. 4 of the blessings that are listed in Matthew's gospel are also found in Luke's gospel. In Luke's gospel, those 4 also then he adds and woes with them, which there's no woes in Matthew's gospel. The Beatitudes that are unique to Matthew that are not found in Luke's gospel or Sermon on the Plain, Matthew's unique ones are the meek, the merciful, the pure of heart, and the peacemakers. So those would not be found in Luke's Beatitudes that are in what we call the Sermon on the Plain. So a beatitude is a declaration of special blessedness. And some people call these types of sayings macarisms, which is from the Greek New Testament word makaroi, often translated as blessed. Then the word beatitude that we say comes from Jerome's 4th century translation of the Bible, which is known as the Vulgate, where he translated the Bible into Latin. And in that translation, the word is beati. So that's where we get this beatitude from, that Latin word beati. Jesus did not invent this beatitude form. He's drawing upon the Hebrew scriptures. You can find similar blessings in Genesis 14. And I've added these also into the on the handout if you print that out. Genesis 14, 18 through 20, Ruth 2, 19 through 20, Psalm 84, 4 through 5, Psalm 118, 26, Proverbs 27, Jeremiah 17, 7 through 8. So Jesus is then elevating these to new levels and teachings. So the next thing I'd like to do is have someone volunteer read aloud the 9 Beatitudes. Do I have a volunteer? Judy, would you be willing to read them? Thanks.
Mute here quickly. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way, they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm gonna exit out of that, and I'm gonna pull up Amy Jill Levine's, let me see here, teaching on this.
I don't think Jesus actually gave the Sermon on the Mount here on the Mount of the Beatitudes. If Jesus had recited all of Matthew chapters 5 through 7 at one sitting, the disciples' heads probably would have exploded somewhere around the end of chapter 5. There's simply too much rich information, too much teaching to be delivered at one time. Jesus taught on multiple occasions and in multiple settings. He taught in homes, private homes, and that's the basis of the house church eventually. Jesus taught all the time, and he taught on various subject areas. He taught the interpretation of Torah, the scriptures of Israel, how to follow the law that God gave to Israel by the hand of Moses. He taught about how to understand the prophets. He taught about how you take lessons from nature, be it the birds that are singing or the ravens or the lilies. So what Matthew has done as a good editor, a good organizer, is take what might be considered to be Jesus' greatest hits and put them all together at the beginning, and thereby telling his readers, gentle reader, if you want to understand the gospel, if you want to understand Jesus, indeed, if you want to understand what it means to have one foot in the kingdom of heaven, pay attention to the Sermon on the Mount first, and the rest of it will follow naturally. Our job, 2,000 years later, is to try to listen to him not only through what we process today, not only through our own experiences, but to try to make that trip 2,000 years ago and listen again to Jesus as he would have sounded to a group of first century Jewish people on the hillside in the Galilee. Matthew starts us off in the Sermon on the Mount with a group of teachings called the Beatitudes, from the Latin term for blessed. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who pursue righteousness. It's a wonderful way of beginning any sort of speech because it doesn't demand anything. It says you're blessed in your condition. Indeed, even if you think times are hard, times are difficult, times are tragic. Blessed are you when you are mourning, for you will be comforted. Blessed are you because you are children of God. Blessed are you because you are in the image and likeness of God. And blessed are you because you are loved. In the first beatitude, Jesus speaks to those whom he calls poor in spirit. In Luke's version of this beatitude, it's blessed are you poor. That has a stress on economics. But Matthew is doing even more here. The poor in spirit may well be economically poor, indeed economically destitute. But to be poor in spirit, the Hebrew would be anavim. The poor in spirit are those who recognize their dependence on others, recognize that they can't do it alone. They can see the gap between those who have and those who have not. And it is a blessing to be able to know in what sense you are wealthy and in what sense you are actually impoverished if you cannot recognize the poverty of others. To be poor in spirit is to feel in your heart and in your head what it means to be without, and then work to try to bring to those who lack something that you have. Jesus blesses those who are meek. And I used to think that meek meant kind of quiet and mousy. In the old Wizard of Oz movie where Dorothy calls herself the meek in front of the great and terrible Oz. That's not what meek means at all, at least not in Greek. The Greek term is praus, and a meek person in Greek would have the sense of somebody who has authority, has power, but is willing to say, wait a minute, I can learn from those who have less power than I. I can learn from those who don't have the strength that I have, and I can get down off my high horse and out of my position of entitlement. A meek person is somebody who recognizes privilege and then forgoes it, gives up authority, gives up power, and shares that power, that authority with others. A meek person is somebody who is willing to listen to somebody else rather than just say, I know it all. Blessed are they. All times are difficult. COVID-19 with self-isolation is difficult. Looking at American racism, systemic problems is difficult. And Jesus speaks about blessed are those who mourn. These are not just people who mourn because they've lost loved ones. And that itself is a blessing because not everybody has the ability to say, I love so much that I actually miss this person. I actually mourn this person. But the Beatitudes are more than just personal. The Beatitudes are communitarian. The Beatitudes are national. The Beatitudes are universal. Blessed are those who mourn the lack of justice. Blessed are those who mourn because human beings have not gotten our act together to treat each other as brothers and sisters. Blessed are those who mourn lack, who mourn poverty, who mourn what we should be giving each other, and we haven't found the ability to do so yet. One of the Beatitudes that we did not talk about in the book, we just ran out of pages. Blessed are the pure in heart. The pure in heart indeed are those who don't think evil thoughts about others, who don't give them the evil eye. But the pure in heart are those who can become the light of the world. The pure in heart are those who are the salt of the earth because they know who they are. They recognize their talents and they recognize their relationship with other people, with nature, with animals, with the world that God created in all its goodness. And if you can recognize all that, your belongedness, then you find yourself to be pure in heart. It may be that the beatitude we need most today, blessed are the peacemakers, because it's so hard. To be a peacemaker is not simply to compromise on everything, because there are certain things where you cannot compromise: justice, righteousness, theology. Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers. We might think of that old Monty Python line about blessed are the cheesemakers. It's important to listen closely. Peacemaking may be the most difficult here of the Beatitudes because peacemaking is hard. In times with peacemaking, you have to compromise. At the very least, you have to listen to what the person across the table is arguing. And sometimes compromise is impossible on justice, on righteousness. And sometimes you might think, perhaps peacemaking is not the way to go. Perhaps it's time to do something a little bit more violent. Burn a draft card. Some people may remember those days. Storm a city, chain yourself to a fence, lie down in the middle of the street, and actually cause injustice to stop. One person's peacemaking may be somebody else's terrorism. How do you know who the peacemakers are? Ideally, you know, because nobody dies at the end. Ideally, you know, because you do it in such a way that you are, in fact, pure of heart and not self-interested, but interested in the community. How do you know? because you recognize that the person across the table from you is not the devil, is not the enemy, but is also in the image and likeness of God. And the only way to begin to make peace is to see that human connection, be pure in heart, work for righteousness, and realize that in doing this peacemaking, you may in fact be persecuted for righteousness' sake. Does that mean you don't do it? Absolutely not. You do it. It's hard and it's absolutely worth it. There are various forms in Hebrew that suggest the Beatitudes. Now, the New Testament is written in Greek. Jesus spoke Aramaic and probably some Hebrew. But his Aramaic listeners, those Jews on some mountain in Galilee or some synagogue in Judea, when they heard blessed are, or perhaps happy are, that would have been a form of blessing familiar to them. They would have heard that blessing in their prayers. They would have heard it in the Psalms of Israel. They would have heard it in the prophets. So Jesus meets his people where they are, where they would have been a little bit surprised, as blessed are those who are persecuted for my name's sake, for the sake of Jesus, because that was something new. But at this point, early on in the Gospel of Matthew, nobody is persecuting the followers of Jesus because he hasn't said anything that would cause any sort of controversy whatsoever. He's teaching like a good Jewish teacher. And the fact is that even when he disagrees with fellow Jews, at the end of the day, they know they're all still Jews. Might you get persecuted? Might somebody say something negative against you? Might you get a door slammed in your face because you disagree? Absolutely. But that happens within families, that happens within communities. But if you are persecuted, you also know that you are supposed to be a peacemaker. Persecuted doesn't mean you go persecute back. If somebody dismisses you, if somebody closes the door in your face, that's not your enemy. That is your friend, that is your neighbor, and the response to persecution is love. It's hard to have a favorite beatitude. That's like saying, what's your favorite parable or what's your favorite gospel? Can't do it. My favorite beatitude is usually the one that I happen to be working on at the time. But the one that resonates with me the most is blessed are those who mourn, because I know a number of people who can't mourn. They've been told, we don't cry, we're too strong. Or, I never really felt that close, so I don't feel that feeling of mourning. I know what it's like to mourn. I've lost my grandmother. Both my parents are dead, and I'm an only child, and I lived with my grandmother and with my mother and my father. When my father died, I didn't immediately mourn. I just felt kind of numb. And it took about 2 or 3 weeks. And I was up late one night. I was having a hard time sleeping. And suddenly, just sitting there with a cup of tea at the kitchen table, the tears started to come. And that was such a blessing. It was an emotional release. It was my final way of expressing how much I missed my dad. Every year on the anniversary of his death, which comes up in the beginning of June, I remember again the times that we had, and I feel this lump in my throat. And at the same time, I'm smiling because there's such good memories. And I feel blessed that I have these positive memories and that I can mourn the loss. And at the same time I'm mourning, I remember. Blessed are those who can remember, and blessed are those whose memories are good ones.
All right. So we've got about 8 minutes left. And I've got all kinds of questions here that I could throw out, but I want to just open it up to you, let you interact with what you've heard and anything that kind of caught your attention or made you question, or, you know, you have a comment.
that blessed are the meek has always troubled me. So that was very good to hear. It makes more sense to me now.
Mhm.
Just a thing that has been a thorn about this whole thing. It doesn't. So this was good.
Good, good. What did you hear that kind of unlocked that for you?
Well, it wasn't about trying to hide your strengths or something. It was just, it was about relating to other people and communicating with other people and having other people join in with what you're communicating. And I think that's a huge thing, and not be a know-it-all.
Mhm. Mhm. Some humility.
Yeah.
I was
Humility,
thinking,
but still strong,
Right.
but in a very different way. It's just in enabling other people in the same time that you're teaching.
Mhm.
I specifically was thinking of the power that was created that we've studied in the past of the white supremacy, and how that entire definition of being meek and passing and sharing the authority, and those who have a voice and sitting back and listening, taking a step back from the elevation that has been given in terms of power. That's how I was relating to meek.
Mhm. No, it was very timely.
The thing that strikes me the most is when I hear this is how remarkable, a person, I will call him a person and not God, that he was. Because the thing I always remember is that when his parents can't find him at a young age, I think about 12, he was in the synagogue and he was instructing the rabbis, and they were in rapt attention to what he was saying. And it had to be because he was making what they believed come to life more than just words. But he also had a view and a perspective and a depth of understanding that had to shock him, not only because he was young, but he had such a new, fresh perspective on something which they didn't have. And he could catch, their attention for a long time because what he was saying was remarkable. And it's just like, him doing these Beatitudes. It was a whole fresh way of looking at life, way of living life that no one had ever heard before.
Mhm.
And to do that at such a young age, and then later on as an adult, I mean, he was obviously divinely inspired. We have no doubt. But the fact that he was a human being too, to do that and to change the way men live and women live is just astounding. Just astounding.
Thank you.
Could I say one thing before we close?
Oh, for sure.
I just wanted to get this in because it's really such a precious book. I don't know if any of you have heard of Hyatt Moore. He's an artist. He happens to be a believer in Jesus.
Oh, yes.
Do you know of his work?
I think it's the same person. Did he do one of the Last Supper?
I'm not sure about that, maybe, but he did the Beatitudes.
Okay.
And he did such a beautiful sort of grouping of work. He made huge paintings as big as himself of each of the Beatitudes, and they're gorgeous. And a book was made, a little paperback book, which I have, but I can't find it. I was looking for it before this session, but if you go online, Hyatt Moore Beatitudes. Each one is so beautiful, and he just does portraits of individual people, different races, and the emotion on their face is gorgeous. And
That's what he did, that of the Lord's Supper. In fact, I showed it a couple years ago
Did
on
you?
World Communion Sunday. I had it, I think it's the cover of the bulletin, but he,
Yeah.
like, there were indigenous people from around the world whose face
Yes.
he put in the
Mhm.
disciples.
Yeah.
that
So
temple.
if I get my, I ordered a new copy because I guess I lost the old one or I gave it away, but I'll bring it next week and just hold it up. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I love his work.
I
Yeah.
just posted the link to his site.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it'll be right there. So if you just want to click on that, that'll take you right to
Right.
his
And
site.
there's also a video that he did
Ooh.
explaining how he came to paint each one of the Beatitudes. It's so good.
Thank you. Any other comments? We've got about 1 minute.
Can I take an opportunity to thank Patty for, is Patty good?
Her video's gone.
Still there.
I'm sorry. Oh, there you are.
There she is.
Your segment on labyrinths was
Mm.
wonderful.
Oh, thank you. It was a little windy and a little loud out there.
Well, I was happy to see the labyrinth all completed and described.
Yeah, it's beautiful. If you have any questions or whatever, just give me a call and I'm happy to talk to you about it or take you through it. Yeah.
Well, did anybody happen to print out the handout? There's a closing prayer. I thought if somebody
I can't find the link to it.
it should be on the email for
The confirmation email?
No. So the email that went out today on worship, like it had lots of different things and it had, so there should be a link in that email to the handout. But I did see Karen said she has the handout. Would you be willing, there's a prayer I printed.
Sure.
On the handout, if you'd be willing to lead us in that closing prayer.
Let us pray together. Jesus, our teacher, you are concerned not only with what we believe, but also and especially with what we do. Send us out in your spirit to practice righteousness, that we whom you graciously call blessed may live as blessings in the world, glorifying God in heaven. Amen.
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 Thank you, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you everybody for coming today. Looking forward to further classes. Like I said, Patty's going to lead the next couple weeks. I'm going to be away for 2 weeks. Our daughter is scheduled on October 26th to have a planned C-section. It will be her second little boy that's coming, and we're driving to New Orleans. So we start our drive on Thursday, and we'll get there Saturday, and then we'll stay with her little Byler, our grandson, while she and her husband go into the hospital for several days. Husbands can't come in and out of the hospital under COVID, so her husband will go in with her and stay until she's discharged. So we'll get to be with Byler while he's waiting for his baby brother to come home from the hospital. So we'll be away till November 4th. We fly home. We're driving down, but flying home.
Well, blessed are the grandmothers who get to babysit their grandchildren.
Yeah. No, we're looking forward to that. But
It's so exciting.
yeah, we will be back. And as I said, Patty's going to teach the next 2 weeks, and there may be some other teachers. I know I've floated this by Bob. I'll talk to you offline just to see if you're at all interested in leading any of the classes too. But thank you, everyone, and have a blessed day.